Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Mets Daily on the Fan Arch Network. John Saponaro here with you today and every day to talk about our New York Mets. And of course, before we get started, a quick shout out goes to our friends over at Kalshi for sponsoring the video for a limited time. Use the code FANARCHBASEBALL on the Kalshi app to get $10 when you trade 10. We got a little bit of a bonus episode last week as I popped in on a Saturday unexpectedly to talk about the news that was a bit unexpected in its own right, although a lot of Mets fans, myself included, were pushing for it, and that was the firing of Carlos Mendoza that took place on Friday afternoon, late morning, whatever the case may be. And that means that the Mets have just wrapped up their first series in the post-Carlos Mendoza era. And how did it go? Not so great, all things considered along the way. It was the first series in the Andy Green era, which will not last particularly long, as it's already been stated by David Stearns, the president of baseball operations, that Andy Green is truly an interim manager. He's going to take over and be here simply for the last 81 games of the season, and then he will go back to his role in the front office in player development, and the Mets will conduct a full and complete managerial search. And there were some positives here as the Mets dropped a series to the Philadelphia Phillies. First, let's be clear, the season is over for the New York Mets. Now, that's not to say that there's nothing left to be done. That's not to say that there's no positives that you can glean from the rest of this season. Look, when a season goes away, when a season effectively ends, as early as the Mets season has, especially with all of the potential around it and all of the expectations around it, there are some things that you still want to look towards with regards to the future. And for the New York Mets, the future, 2027 and beyond, is immediate. The Mets are not a rebuilding team. The Mets are not a team struggling to put pieces together, a team that has a horrible roster, a team that has no farm system, a team that has no resources. Just the opposite. The Mets are a team that has been spending at the top of the league since Cohen took over. The Mets are a team with expectations through the roof, but the Mets are a team with a roster in some cases. Obviously, there are holes in this team, and that's a big part of why this has been such a disappointing season. But the Mets are a team with stars and good players on this roster. The Mets are a team that is looking forward to what they can do in the year 2027 and beyond in terms of competitive, in terms of relevant. That's what the Mets are looking for. And despite the fact that Green isn't going to be here, despite the fact that some of these players that are on the roster right now won't be here, whether they opt out, whether they are traded, whether they are DFA'd, whatever the case may be, what you are looking for as a Met fan are the positives for the remainder of this season, because there is just too much season to go. If this season ended and the Mets were eliminated mathematically, with 2 weeks to go, 4 weeks to go, there's not a lot you can glean from that part of the season. There's not a lot you can glean when guys are starting to just pack things up and it's, hey, we're just playing out the string. There's a lot of pride from a lot of these ball players, whether that's Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto just trying to, be who they are and who they've always been, whether that's Bo Bichette, who's trying to bounce back and show that he's the guy the Mets signed and gave that money to, whether that's somebody like A.J. Ewing, Carson Bench, Nolan McLean, people who are young players in this league who are showing, hey, we belong here. We're supposed to be here. Or a guy like Freddie Peralta who's trying to bounce back. A guy like Sean Manaea who's trying to prove that, the money he got and the season he had 2 seasons ago was not a fluke. There's a lot left here in terms of professional pride. And that's what the team is looking for. The team is trying to figure out who is a part of the solution, who's going to be here beyond 2026. And as fans, that's what we have to figure out too. That's what we are looking for now, because there are no empty at-bats for a guy like Juan Soto. He's going to try to be a Hall of Famer. He's not going to sit here and just pack it in because his team isn't good. There are no empty at-bats for A.J. Ewing because he's trying to prove that he is a major league player and he's a contributor and he's a guy who's going to be here for, 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case may be. And so when the Mets lose this series to the Phillies, it sucks, right? You want the team to win. You want the team to show fight. But the team, in a lot of cases, did show some fight. Now, they didn't get it done. They lost the second series in a row to the Phillies, back-to-back weekends. But it was not this complete decimation the way that it was last week in Philadelphia. Now, whether or not that's because the team can play looser, because Carlos Mendoza was fired, they don't have to play for him and try to fight for his job anymore, whether that's because the team hated Carlos Mendoza and they're playing better for Andy Green, I don't think that's the case, but it doesn't matter. There were positive signs in this series. Of course, the highlight being Saturday, the game that they won, which we can talk about in a little bit, but there were some positive signs. There were some negative signs too. There were some things that reared their ugly head. There were some good things. There were some bad things. Look, Green in his press conferences has been steady. He's said a lot of the right things. He's shown a lot of poise. He's shown a lot of confidence. He knows that this is not a job that he necessarily wants. He knows that this is a job, though, that is very important for something that he is a part of and something he is passionate about, which is the player development side for the New York Mets. There's a lot of player development that is going to happen over these 81 games. Now, look, there was some interesting things, not good, not bad, about the way Green deployed the roster instead of what Carlos Mendoza was doing. Some things I agreed with, some things I disagreed with. But again, for 2026, it largely doesn't matter. It was just refreshing to watch something that was different. Now, again, it didn't work, right? Mets lose a series, and some of the moves make you scratch your head a little bit, leaving in Kodai Senga a little bit too long on Sunday. He gives up that home run on a bad pitch that he shouldn't have thrown, that wasn't located great to Schwarber, and that's the difference in the game. But on the flip side of it, Kodai Senga goes like 5 innings in relief and only gives up those 2 runs and looks pretty effective while doing it. Now, I don't want Kodai Senga on this team, but maybe the Mets are trying to show something with regards to Senga's value so they don't have to DFA him, so that maybe they can trade him somewhere and eat a little bit of money or whatever. But there were things in these games. Now our focus as fans isn't on the win-loss record because the Mets' focus as an organization isn't on the win-loss record. So I'm looking for, and this is not a positive spin, by the way. This is not me saying, hey guys, everything's cool now. This sucks. I don't want to do this. I don't want to have this conversation with you on June 29th. That's ridiculous. But there are things that we can look at differently now that we know winning isn't really the top thing. It's not the main priority. Now, look, you'd like to see the Mets go on a little bit of a run at some point this summer for no other reason than just respectability, right? Even if the playoffs are out of reach and everything is dead, you'd like to see the Mets, have a really good month because nobody wants to watch a 70-something win team, right? Or worse. The Mets were on pace, I think, to win 68 games. We talked about one of the shows last week. So you don't want to watch a team that's going to win in the high 60s, low 70s. You don't want to watch that. So if the Mets could get this back to a point where they could be closer to 500 at the end of the season, when, that's not going to get you anywhere, but, it's not going to be the most awful record in the world. It's not going to be something that just makes you recoil. Yeah, the season is dead. The season sucks. But there are things here that we can take away from on this series with the Philadelphia Phillies. And I want to focus on some of those things here today because, again, good or bad in terms of results doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter the way that it did a month ago. It doesn't matter the way that it did 6 weeks ago. But it is refreshing to see them just do something else. It's refreshing to not have to see Carlos Mendoza. It's refreshing to see the Mets have Lindor and Soto and Bichette, come what may, all on the field at the same time. So there are some positives here, and they're not the positives that any of us want, but I'm going to try to find these nuggets of positivity throughout the remainder of the season, because if we just sit here and we pretend like everything's all good, that's not really how any of us wanted to spend our July, August, and September. But at the same time, if everything, regardless of win, lose, or draw, is just doom and gloom, you guys ain't going to watch this. I want you to tune in to Mets Daily. I want you to tune in and hang out with me for about 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. That's what I want. So nobody can take doom and gloom. Oh, this team sucks. Oh, this team is brutal. Oh, this team is... Look, if that's where they're at, I'm still going to tell you that, because I told you on day one I'd never lie to you, and I'm going to tell it to you like it is. But we're going to try to find things. We're going to try to find interesting ways to talk about this team. And I think the first one that I wanted to talk about here in this new portion of the season is Bo Bichette and Francisco Alvarez. Why are those guys lumped together for the sake of this segment? Well, I think, and this is an unpopular opinion amongst Mets fans, but I think those two individuals get too much hate. I think they get more hate than they deserve. And I'll tell you why. Let's start with Bo Bichette. Bo Bichette had an abysmal start to the season. Bo Bichette was adjusting to a new league. Bo Bichette was adjusting to a new team in a new city with different expectations and a lot of money. And that is a difficult thing to adjust to, especially in New York, especially in a big market, but anywhere. We've seen it all over the league. We've seen it time and time again, year in and year out. And look, these guys are professionals. They get paid a lot of money. Bo Bichette is no different. He grew up in clubhouses. This is not me saying, oh, guys, we need to feel bad for Bo Bichette. No, you don't need to feel bad for him. This isn't, oh, man, like, what is he going to be okay? This is not that kind of a situation. My point is, let's have a little bit of perspective, because weeks ago, I said to you, it wouldn't matter if we get to the end of the season and Bo Bichette has good numbers if the Mets suck. And that's still true. But if you separate Bo Bichette's first 6 weeks as a New York Met from what he's done in the time since, he's been good. And he deserves credit for, in an individual basis, not letting this thing swallow him up like a black hole and showing that he is a pro. And I think that he is a piece for this team. And I hope that Bo Bichette opts in, because I think Bo Bichette, with a year in New York under his belt, is going to be a massive player for the New York Mets. I love the signing when they made it. I thought if you got the Bo Bichette that we all thought we were going to get, this guy was going to do some amazing things. On my bold prediction show, Until Mets Do His Part, I said he was going to lead the National League in RBI. He's not going to do that, but he is leading the Mets in RBI right now. And I know part of that is because Lindor was hurt and Soto was hurt, and he's got a little bit of a head start. But for a guy who everybody talks about is so bad, and is so terrible and can't drive in runs, the numbers aren't really that bad when you look at them. And that's the other part of this that you have to keep in perspective. Because he started out so poorly, a lot of people are sitting there now, and every single time he doesn't come through, they want to hate on him. Every single time, it's just disgust. But remember, guys, this is baseball, and you fail more than you succeed. Again, I am not trying to make excuses for these players. I am not trying to sugarcoat what has been a bad season. But if you look at Bo Bichette's last month, if you look at Bo Bichette's last 10 games, if you look at Bo Bichette's last 3 games, last 5 games, last 20 games, all of his numbers are good. He's hitting over 300. Over a certain sample, he's hitting 355. Over another sample, he's hitting 400. He's knocking in runs. He's hitting for more power. Bo Bichette, outside of tanking his numbers over the first month plus, outside of that, he's had a good season. Now, again, I know When the Mets needed him most, he wasn't there, and that is on him, and he deserves criticism for that. And the team deserves criticism for it because it's nobody's fault but theirs, ultimately, because Bo Bichette wasn't given the grace period that other stars are given when they come to New York, because no one was there to pick up the slack for Bo Bichette. While Bo Bichette adjusted, no one was there to help him. Soto got hurt early. Lindor got hurt as soon as Soto got back. The team wasn't clicking on all cylinders, even for the brief time that all those guys were together. Other guys didn't hold up their end of the bargain. Other guys got hurt too. So no one's going to sit here and feel sorry for these guys. They did this to themselves. So again, I'm not asking you to have any kind of, oh, woe is me for Bo Bichette. Oh, it's okay. No, I get it. I get the frustration. But at the same time, you have to look at where he is in totality. And one of two things is going to happen at the end of this season. He's going to get his numbers to a respectable enough place where he's going to opt out and some of you guys are going to be happy that he's gone. Or he's going to get his numbers to wherever he gets and he's going to decide to not opt out. And if he finishes off the season strong from, I don't know, let's just call it the beginning of June through the rest of the year, that's going to be a massive building block for 2027 when the Mets are going to need a guy just like Bo Bichette. So again, it's all about just having the perspective. And when it comes to the perspective, that's why I lumped him together with Francisco Alvarez, even though they're two very different players in two very different situations. The unfair hate that I feel like Francisco Alvarez gets is, despite the fact that he has not lived up to the billing of a offensive, legitimate threat, top catcher in the league, number one prospect, good on both sides of the ball, which is what we thought we were going to get in his rookie year. He hasn't lived up to that. And again, he deserves criticism for not living up to that. I don't need you to feel bad for Francisco Alvarez for not living up to certain expectations. But he does not deserve to be lumped in the same category as Mark Vientos or Brett Baty, and to a lesser extent, Ronnie Mauricio. I hear a lot of people say, I'm done with the baby Mets, which baby Mets is the worst term ever, but I'm done with the baby Mets. Vientos, Baty, Mauricio, Alvarez. Alvarez should not be put into that category. First of all, Brett Baty is a bad offensive player. Full stop. In every sense of the word, the guy does not hit unless it's spring training or it's AAA. He never has, not really, outside of a couple hot weeks last year that brought his numbers back to respectability. Mark Vientos is a bad player. We've spent too much time on him already. He's a bad offensive player. He's a bad base runner. He's a bad defensive player. He's got a bad attitude, and I think he has a bad baseball IQ. In every sense of the word, he's a bad player. He's probably the worst of the group because he doesn't really do anything well unless he's hitting. He's got power potential, he's got RBI potential, but that's all it is just potential outside of a spectacular season in 2024. But we've seen guys all over baseball since baseball has began have unbelievable one season and never do it again. And Ronnie Mauricio, and I said to a lesser extent, but Ronnie Mauricio is a very flawed player. I've always said that Ronnie Mauricio is kind of like a combination between Brett Baty and Mark Vientos in that he's a better defensive player, but he's also profiles as a better offensive player. He's kind of the combination of both. If you could put Vientos and Baty into one body, you'd get a guy like Ronnie Mauricio, who is more athletic, has some versatility, has power, plays pretty good defense, not at shortstop, but graded out positively at third base, graded out, I think, positively at second base as well. So this is a guy who can offer you a lot of stuff theoretically. Now, some of it is through no fault of his own. He can't stay healthy, and he's never really had the chance to prove that. But despite whether or not he can prove it or not, he's been a guy who simply has not done it consistently. He had all the runway in the world to be the Mets starting shortstop for nearly 2 months, and he couldn't stay on the field. That's part of it. Bart Scott said it forever ago. The best ability is availability. And Ronnie Mauricio doesn't have it. Now, when you look at those three guys, you can see why the Mets are sour on them. You can see how they're running out of chances. And I understand for some of you that want to lump Alvarez into that mix. I get it. I get the frustration. He hasn't lived up to the billing. He swings for the fences too much. He's regressed defensively. There's a lot there that is going to frustrate you. But I have always said that I will continue to grade on a curve for Francisco Alvarez because he's 24 years old, he came up super young, and he is a catcher with 25 to 30 home run potential. And that is something I am not willing to give up on, not at this point, not when he's still 24 years old. Not when the guy is proven to be a gamer. Yeah, a little bit injury prone, but the guy fights to get back. The guy heals quick. He's back on the field, and he provides. Now, I know the catching position is thin across baseball, but that's even more of a reason why you don't want to pull the ripcord on Francisco Alvarez. Not yet. Because even as inconsistent as he has been, he can provide top 10 catcher in baseball kind of offense. And again, I know it's because it's a thin position, but you have to then take that into account and understand what you might be able to get. And look, if that means that you want to deploy him more as a DH and you want to use Terrens more and you want to lean into Terrens' defensive ability, I have no issues with that. We've talked about that before on this show. But I don't think it's fair that he gets absolutely dunked on. I don't think he belongs in the category with the other two and maybe even the other three. And I think whether it's Bichette or it's Alvarez, folks need to understand that there's a difference between being underproductive and being unproductive. Beatty is unproductive. He is not a productive player by and large. Vientos is not a productive player. Alvarez, to this point in his career, he's been underwhelming. He's been underproductive. He hasn't been unproductive. He hasn't offered you nothing. And to a different degree, because the contract is different and the veteran status in the league is different, Bo Bichette. Yeah, Bo Bichette has been a massive problem. He's a big part of the reason why the Mets are where they are. Because if he got here and he hit the ground running and he was Bo Bichette, he probably would have been able to carry this team. And this team would not be buried. So that's a major problem. He was the problem on offense when everybody else went down. But he's not the problem in all capital letters because he is a productive player. He is. And he's going to be. He's not an unrosterable player. And I know we all like to use hyperbole and, this guy sucks, get him off the team. This guy sucks, get him off the team. You can't do that with everybody. Realistically, you have to pick your spots. Beatty and Vientos don't have roles on this team. Not past this season. Hell, I don't think they should have roles on this team right now, especially as other guys come back healthy. Bo Bichette has a role on this team in the future, and I hope he stays. And Francisco Alvarez is going to be here, and he has a role on this team in the future. Baseball season is here and now. You can trade every game on Kalshi. And you guys know, before I hit record, I jump on over to the Kalshi app. I like to check out what's going on, see where there's good value for you guys. And we'll talk about the series with the Toronto Blue Jays kicking off today in a minute. But a little bit of a preview there. Pretty nice odds on Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to hit a home run in this game, trading at 15 cents a share. I know he only has 4 home runs on the year, which is gross for him. I know that they've been a bad offensive team, Toronto. And again, this has been a down year for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. But I like the matchup. I like some of the under the hood numbers for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I think he's been a little unlucky. And I don't want to see him beat Sean Manaea. I'd like to see the Mets win games. But I think Sean Manaea, lefty, a little bit of a slower fastball. I think that plays into Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s strengths. I do. And at 15 cents a share, where $100 can get you $629, I think that's really good value. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there is no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy into and out of your position for a limited time. You already know. Download the Kalshi app and use the code FANARCHBASEBALL to get $10 when you trade 10 Kalshi. Trade on anything. Must be 18 and over. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risks and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. I'm not going to spend too much time on this segment, but on Saturday, Mets had a really good win. And it is so unfortunate to see a glimpse of what could have been. Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto have been on the field together for 11 games. And that has been a massive factor as to why the Mets are as bad as the Mets are. Has it been the only factor? No. Other injuries have mattered. The starting rotation falling apart has mattered. Other guys not contributing has mattered. But your two best players not being able to play is a huge issue. And it sucks because the Mets got a glimpse of what could have been. And that's not even factoring in Bo Bichette, where your three best players are all on the field together. And they're all in the mix, getting on base, driving in runs, extra base hits. That's what happened on Saturday. So it's sad because it's probably not going to matter for 2026. And I think that's why I wanted to do that segment and mention Bichette, talk about him as much as I did, because I think if you put these three back together in 2027 and you tweak the periphery of the roster, that's a top three that you can put up against a lot of folks. You add in the maturation of Carson Bench and AJ Ewing. You cut some of the dead weight off of this team. You add a player here, a player there, maybe even bring in another star. Who the hell knows? This is a team. This is an offense that should make a lot of noise. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say injuries, because that's not the story for the Mets season. There's been a lot of issues. Injuries haven't helped. But when your two best players aren't on the field and your two best players aren't on the field together, that's something that you can't account for, and it's something that you can't replace. Lindor and Soto are not injury-prone players in their career. They're bankable. You know, the Mets made a mistake by trying to catch lightning in a bottle with Jorge Polanco and Luis Robert Jr., two guys with a tremendous injury history in their careers. You probably can only afford to bring in one of those guys. You bring in two, you start to see what happened. But with Soto and Lindor, they play, and they play all the time. And so you can't account for it, but also how many teams can survive 81, or I guess at this point, 83 games into a season where the two best players spend less than 2 weeks worth of games on the field together. You can't account for it, and you can't replace it. And it's very clear that the Mets can't replace it because they hit the skids without those guys. Hell, even now that they're both back, you saw the difference between Saturday and Sunday. Now, I know Sunday they're facing a lefty. They made some tweaks to the lineup. Some I agreed with, some I didn't agree with. But Lindor wasn't available. And if Lindor was available, you know he's getting a pinch hit at bat somewhere. Maybe for Beatty, maybe for somebody else. And maybe the Mets don't leave an army on base. Because that was the difference in this game. Mets leaving people on base constantly. And going all the way back to the first segment, that's some of the stuff that the Mets continue to do that's, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. There's no accounting for it, and there's no replacing it. We saw it for 2 weeks when Soto was out. We saw it for 2 months when Lindor was out. And then we saw the difference between Saturday and Sunday when Lindor played with Soto and Bichette and when Lindor didn't. And it sucks that we have an unfortunate glimpse at this. And honestly, the one negative of these guys playing together for the rest of the season is when Lindor gets fully healthy and he starts playing most games like he usually does, and Soto's in there and he's playing most games, I think you're going to see this team play better baseball. And again, if you're like me, and as Mets fans, we all should be rooting for the Mets to do well regardless. But it's going to be a painful reminder of what could have been and what wasn't. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about this series, interleague play, Mets and Toronto Blue Jays, two of the most disappointing teams in Major League Baseball right now. Two teams that came in with huge expectations and two teams who have not lived up to those expectations. Toronto right now 39-45. They're in third place in the AL East, but they are only 2 games back of the final wild card spot, which shows you the difference between where the AL is and where the NL is with regards to just the quality of play across the league. Toronto has also lost 6 games in a row. They got swept by the Texas Rangers, so they're reeling a little bit. They have some talent, but the talent has not lived up to the hype. Pitching has been good. Offense has been terrible. We already talked a little bit about how Vladimir Guerrero has been down in the power department, down in the average department. You look at his Savant page and there's some stuff that you like and you wonder how he is hitting the way that he's hitting, but he's been bad. And the offense on the whole has been bad. This is also the first time Bo Bichette, of course, will play against the Toronto Blue Jays in Toronto to boot. We'll see what kind of response and reaction he gets from the crowd. I don't think they're going to boo him. I think the fans in Toronto really like Bo Bichette, and I think they understand the business decision that Toronto decided to keep Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and I think they were resigned to the fact they were going to lose Bo Bichette to somewhere. And Bo Bichette's got a lot of love for that city. He's got a lot of love for that team, and I think that city is going to reciprocate. So I don't think he's going to get booed. I mean, there might be a smattering of boos because there's always, some idiots in the stands. But, Bo Bichette didn't choose to leave the Toronto Blue Jays. The Toronto Blue Jays weren't super involved because they didn't think that they were going to be able to go where his market went. So it'd be interesting to see, but, I wouldn't get too hung up on it. Obviously, we're Mets fans anyway. Who cares? And Bo Bichette gets enough grief at Citi Field from the Mets faithful. I'm sure that most of you don't care about what happens with Toronto. We touched on it just a bit, but the first game of the series tonight, you got Sean Manaea versus Trey Yesavage. Sean Manaea has been really, really good lately. I don't love the matchup against certain guys like Okamoto and the aforementioned Vladimir Guerrero Jr., but, again, their offense has been down, and Sean Manaea has been trending in a positive direction. So let's see if he continues to build off of that. Trey Yesavage was a revelation last year, and he's been okay this year, 3-3 with a 3.56 ERA. But over their last 3 starts, Sean Manaea actually a bit better. Manaea's got a 4.40 ERA, 15 strikeouts with 3 walks, whereas Trey Yesavage sitting with a 4.50 ERA, 14 strikeouts, and 11 walks. He's not been good in the month of June. I think he has an ERA over 6 in all 4 of his starts in the month of June. So this will be his 5th start in the month. So Yesavage is going through a bit of a rough patch. He's got all the talent in the world. He could beat the Mets, obviously. A lot of teams can beat the Mets. But it looks like the Mets are going to roll out their A-plus lineup. Lindor gets the off day on Sunday. Lindor's going to play. Bichette's going to play. Soto's going to play. We got Jared Young, who's going to get the lion's share of the starts against all the right-handers at first base, but even against some tough lefties. Mets are getting healthier. They got Tyrone Taylor back. Of course, you've got Benj. Of course, you've got Ewing. So, this is a tough one to call because Yesavage is good enough to figure it out against the Mets and get right against the Mets. But the way he's going right now with the Mets getting healthier, I could see this one being a bit of a coin flip. Then you've got Nolan McLean versus Kevin Gossman. Kevin Gossman, the almost Met that never was. Again, eerily similar numbers for these two guys on the season. McLean 4-5 with a 4.03 ERA. Gossman 4-6 with a 4.30 ERA. 106 strikeouts for McLean, 93 strikeouts for Gossman. Again, this is a team in Toronto that's been pitching well for the most part this season. The problem has been their offense. But the Mets, prior to getting some of those injuries, were also pitching well in the starting rotation. The problem was their offense. This is the movable force versus the very resistible object, right? Like this is, I don't know how to call these games. They feel like they could go either way. Plus, are the Mets still riding this high of playing, different, playing looser for a new manager versus Toronto, who's still pressing, who still has playoff chances, but has to start to get things right, who has lost 6 in a row? Are they due to get right against the Mets? Or are the Mets going to continue to beat on them the way other teams have beat on them? These are very, very, very hard games to predict. I don't know how to call the Manaea Yasavage one. If this is last season, advantage Toronto. This season, unsure. McLean Gossman, coin flip. You get to the final game of the series, the advantage should go to the New York Mets. Freddie Peralta versus Patrick Corbin. Peralta 5-6 on the season, Corbin 2-4. Peralta with that inflated 4.53 ERA. Patrick Corbin has basically been bad for years. The one thing is he takes the ball, pitches. He's got a 5.09 ERA, but he's a lefty. The Mets have trouble hitting lefties. The Mets don't have a lot of guys who can thump lefties, especially when you're going to sit certain players. Now, I don't think that Corbin is the kind of guy that you need to sit people for. Jesus Luzardo, who the Mets faced on Sunday, he's the kind of guy, high 90s, not the perfect pitcher, but he would qualify as a tough lefty, a tough matchup lefty-lefty. I don't think Patrick Corbin qualifies as that. So that's the game, and we'll talk about it more as we get closer throughout the week, but that's the game that I have circled, because as we talk about trying to find the positive and trying to find the differences and leaning into how this team under Green is different from the team under Mendoza, Green talked about Jared Young playing most of the first base. Well, I'd like to see Jared Young play against Patrick Corbin. Without question, Carson Benz needs to play against Patrick Corbin. Carson Benz is playing basically every day. A.J. Ewing, a guy who sat against Jesus Luzardo and then came up, had a huge pinch hit home run. He needs to play in this game against Patrick Corbin. So we've got to wait a couple days to find the answer to that. But this is a series, and we talked about it a couple days ago before the Cubs series last week, when I said the Mets had 20 games where they could save their season. The Mets did the opposite. They got swept by the Cubs, then they lost the games to the Phillies, and the Cubs embarrassed them, and they fired their manager, and blah, 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 everything we talked about all last week. Instead of the Mets finding a way to make their season relevant, the Mets cemented the fact that they suck and their season is going to be terrible. But this is a winnable series against Toronto. It just is. Would it surprise me if the Mets swept the Blue Jays? No. But would it surprise me if the Blue Jays swept the Mets? No. Is that some kind of crack analysis that you guys come here for? No. But I don't know how to call it other than that. It is such a coin flip kind of series because it's two teams that do some of the same things well and some of the same things poorly. And it's two teams that came in with a lot of expectations and haven't delivered. And it's two teams that should be pitching better in certain spots and certain guys are down and certain guys. It's just such an odd series to tell. So if you told me right now the Mets are going to sweep, I'd believe you. If you told me right now the Mets get swept, I believe you. And I would believe every other outcome in between. Mets win the series, Jays win the series. Mets win game 1, Jays win game 1. You see where I'm going with this. I would believe any outcome in any of these games. Because I think that both of these teams are so equally matched in their futility. That's going to do it for this episode of Mets Daily. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We're just over 4,000 subscribers, and we would love to get to 5,000 before the season is over. And more than that, we would love for you to be a part of that group. Until next time, I'm John Saponaro. See you tomorrow.